That makes
But
sense.
sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I was saying that makes sense. I follow that.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not that like I like Coke now and then tomorrow I decide I want Pepsi. That would not be a time of consistency. But if I was saying what do I want to drink tomorrow, and I said right now I want to make it so that my future self will drink Coke, and then a day goes by and you're like, actually I want the Pepsi. Of course, we all know that people's tastes can change. So that's kind of a bad example. A better example would be something like how much money do you get to consume and how much of your money do you save? This is a real economic problem. Whether or not you eat a marshmallow or what type of soda you drink, that's not what we're concerned about. But we are concerned about how savings are affected in this country. What sort of rate do Americans save their money? You guys know about credit cards. Do some of you actually think that we'd be better off if credit cards weren't so available and easy to use everywhere?
A
Save
hundred
money.
percent.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I got a lot of responses for this.
Yeah,
Wow, this is
no.
like
And I've got
day.
the reason why I think that is that not credit cards are evil. It's that people don't know what credit cards are, but because it's so accessible, they can abuse what credit cards can do. So
So
it's just like the moral problem of I don't understand the consequences of my actions, but you're putting a lot of power in my hands so I can do whatever I want with it.
great. I agree. Did somebody else want to say something?
To kind of jump off of James, it ties back into the fact that there's a self-control problem. People prefer to have, I guess, in the confines of economics, their consumption now rather than in the future. So credit cards, even though you may not exactly have the money now, you can still have that consumption. So that's what they do.
Yeah, very good. And one other person, I want to give you a
I
chance.
can say something. I think that the credit cards in theory are fine. I think that the American system of being a slave to our credit score is really problematic.
Interesting. A slave to
Yeah.
our credit score, meaning that if we fail and
Basically, if I'm an 18-year-old who's just gotten my first credit card and I make a couple of bad purchases and run my score down, I now have to spend about a decade getting it back to what it once was. And I think that that's really damaging to a lot of people on the lower end of our economic scale.
interesting. So more forgiveness, more forgetfulness
Yeah.
is needed in these credit ratings.
I
Yeah.
would say it might hurt the middle and cause some polarization too, because you might be budgeting conservatively or at least, I guess, at your limit. But you'd be competing with people who are kind of leveraging a different system. So it kind of overrides risk aversion to a degree, maybe.
Okay, I don't get necessarily the risk aversion comment, but I think I get the basics of that point. Yeah, I agree with almost everybody. And you don't need a behavioral economist to tell you this, that there's this issue. I think Emily really summed it up well with, it's probably mostly about self-control, isn't it? Rather than, I'm trying to maximize my utility, and I'm thinking about, okay, what are the costs and benefits of making this purchase now versus later, saving this money now versus using it later. That would be a very rational thing to do. If I've told you nothing else in this class, you should know that people are not perfectly rational. People are not like machines that process all the information and use it, compile it together, analyze it, and make the best decision possible. They have these psychological biases, and self-control is a real problem that is studied, especially among psychologists. But what is behavioral economics but kind of borrowing from these other psychology related things and incorporating it into economics? That's what we do. So yeah, Richard Thaler has done that. Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize for being a behavioral economist, has done this. He studied time inconsistencies. Let me just give you, well, are we done talking about credit cards? I think so. Somebody else said something about it was an abuse of the system. I think it was James. You're saying like, and I was actually wondering, did you mean it was the credit card companies who were abusing the people's lack of knowledge about the consequences of their action? Or did you think it was the consumers who were abusing the fact that they could get such easy credit and they were like, well, I'm going to do it?
I think that point was made by Fergus Johnson, but
yes.
I was making the point that like people don't understand. So I guess you could connect the fact that companies are abusing the ignorance of a lot of people.
Gotcha. And that's a bad thing. Okay. Yeah. Because the question I asked to start this discussion, one of the most successful discussions we've had this whole year in this class, is, do you think credit cards might actually be a bad thing, that they're so available? And I think a lot of people are saying kind of yes, even though they serve a valuable purpose. You need to buy something. You don't necessarily have the money to pay it all off right now. You can use a credit card, get the thing, and pay the credit card company off later when you have more money. I think that's a good thing. That's a good idea. To have that option is nice. But if people have self-control problems, like Emily said, or they don't understand the consequences of the credit card debt, like just they don't really realize how the interest rates are so high compared to normal interest rates. Credit cards make money by charging a high interest rate. So yes. What do behavior? Let's circle back to what behavioral economists would say about this problem. Willpower is one, and dynamic time inconsistencies, I think, are another way to explain it. That if you could, you would choose something different for this path of your spending decisions, but you can't. And in fact, I mentioned this in my video, and they made cute little graphics about the Christmas Club accounts. There's no way to explain a Christmas Club account. If you didn't watch the video, it's this account where money is automatically withdrawn from your paycheck every month up until Christmas or till December. And then the money that was been saved is available. So it's forcing yourself to save money until the holidays. People were doing this because they wanted to make sure they had enough money to buy presents for their family. This is called tying your hands, right? There's no way to explain tying your hands using traditional standard economics. Why should you ever tie your hands? More choices are better. If you're preventing your future self from doing something, and another example of this is the alarm clock that runs away from you when it goes off. If you buy an alarm clock that in the morning, not only does it wake you up, but it stops you from snoozing it. I think we're all aware that there's this, most alarms have a snooze on it, because if it's 7 a.m. and you want to sleep more, it doesn't matter that your alarm is going off. You can just press snooze and then go back to sleep. Well, if the night before you want to prevent your 7 o'clock self from doing that, you can get these programs that will make it almost impossible for you to stop the alarm from ringing unless you accomplish some hard task that is going to wake you up. You might be get out of bed and do something, or solve a problem, or if you press it, I don't know, it'll break something of yours if you don't get out of bed. And that's tying your hand. The oldest example of this is Odysseus. Odysseus is this famous hero from the Odyssey, written in ancient Greece. And it tells the story of a guy who is really, really curious about this song of these, I think they're the sirens is what they're called. But they can be deadly because it makes people jump off into the water and to their death. That's how enticing the sound is. So he had the other sailors on his ship tie his hands to the mast so that he couldn't run off to the sirens, but he still got to hear it. He basically solved the time inconsistency problem. The time inconsistency problem is that my future self is going to want to do something, and my present self wants to stop my future self from doing that thing. And the solution, this is where we get the phrase tying your hands. It's from the Odyssey, where Odysseus chose to tie his hands to the mast as a commitment device. Something else I said in my video was about Dan Ariely's 3 classes. Remember this? Was anybody surprised by that?
That made perfect sense, because I was thinking in the same boat, I would procrastinate the hell out of all of it.
Yeah. So isn't it weird? I take away your choices. I remove the set of choices available to you, and I've made you better off. This goes against standard economic theory, where more choice is better, but it can be explained with self-control problems, procrastination problems, and this time inconsistency problem that can be solved using, those are called commitment devices. Obviously, that's what it is. A commitment device is something that's put in place to help you solve the dynamic inconsistency problem. Okay. What else do I need you to know from this? Let's just quickly look at the slides from this section. Knowing that you've already, I talk about the marshmallow just as an example of how hard it can be to wait, and how actually somebody might want to force themselves to wait. I didn't say this until now, but like, what if actually I did in the video? If a kid were to lock the box of the marshmallow, they would be better off, because they don't have to worry about this temptation of the marshmallow anymore. They can't get it because it's locked. And they're going to get 2 marshmallows after the time goes by, because they're basically solving the time inconsistency problem, or at least in this case, discounting problem. I also wanted to say there's these results, how we're bad at predicting. Not only might we have different ideas of what we should do across time, but we don't even know what our future self would choose to do or would like to do. They do these, they've just surveyed people about, what do you think you would like to do in the future? Something like that. Or what would you like to do now? And there's a big difference here, where people who are predicting what they would choose in the future versus people making a real choice right now tend to do noticeably different things. For example, movies, they think they're going to choose the more serious movie, and then in actuality they choose the sort of the fun movie, the one that's more immediately gratifying. Yes, what else? Okay, let's look. One thing I'm sort of dancing around is that in this book, Predictably Irrational, there's a study that Dan Ariely did on college freshmen being asked really bizarre sexual things. And they also make a prediction, what would you say in an aroused state? And then in a very bizarre experiment, they actually say, okay, guys, it's only men, and it's at UC Berkeley. They say, okay, you're supposed to get yourself in an aroused state and then answer these questions again. And the point of the study was, how accurate were they in predicting their answers in the aroused state? And actually it was pretty bad. And some of them were things that had to do with safety or sexual health, like contraception or other sorts of prophylactics. But also, would you be willing to give alcohol to someone to make them more likely to sleep with you? And all of these things, often that had sort of this moral aspect to it, there was this difference between, people thought themselves as a moral person who wouldn't do that. They even predicted that in this other state, they would also say that they wouldn't want that to happen. But once the state happened, it was different. And of course, we're not talking about 90% to 10% differences. They're more like 40 to 60% differences, something like that. 50-year-old woman. I don't know why. I don't know why you're asking college freshmen, or not, college undergrads, if they can imagine having sex with a 50-year-old woman. But that's what was asked. And they find out in these cold states, you're bad at predicting how you would answer in a hot state. So this is just another example of not only is self-control a problem, but also knowing what your future self would choose to do. We're not necessarily that good at that. Also with food, desserts and dieting. Oftentimes, if this, I don't think I should leave this on for too long. Short-term temptations affect us in ways that we didn't predict. And that includes, people who are on a diet, people who are, trying to avoid alcohol or something like that. Oh, I got a comment. They didn't take Selma Hayek. Okay. And this is about credit cards. We already talked about this. Why can't we save enough from our own retirement? I think it's the same thing. We can't predict or control ourselves. Yeah. I'm not really that interested in giving you a specific mathematic description of time discounting. I don't think I'm going to give you that on the exam. It's just one of those things that's a lot easier to do on a whiteboard or something. And the sort of math behind it, I don't think is particularly interested. The independent variable is whether or not Selma Hayek was involved. Me too. I can read your chats. Anyways. So let me just summarize the mathematics rather than make you learn it. Economists discount the future in this exponential way. And that is 1 year from now would be delta, 2 years from now would be delta squared, 3 years would be delta cubed, 4 years would be delta to the fourth. That exponent keeps growing. And that's a pretty good approximation for how people discount the future. But it turns out, of course, behavioral economics shows that it can't explain it. It can't explain the types of choices that people make specifically about the future. You ask people, would you like 1 apple in a year or 2 apples in a year and a day? If you ask them that, they will say, I would want 2 apples in a year and a day. But once that year elapses, and now the same people are like, okay, would you like an apple today or 2 apples tomorrow? They change their mind and say, no, I really do just want to get the apple now. I don't want to wait another day for another apple. Just give me the apple. And that can't be explained by this type of mathematical discounting with the deltas. That's really what I want you to know about it, is that the math construction of discounting the future does not correspond very well with people's actual choices when you ask them about how they would make decisions in the future. Okay.
Professor, you know how like neuroscientists show that we don't view time linearly, we view it relatively, and so 1 minute versus 1 hour isn't just like a 60 times increase, it's much larger. Has that been attempted to be turned into this?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if ever that sort of quantifying the different experience of waiting has ever been tried to put into a model. Sounds like something Colin Kammerer would do with his neuroeconomics. But no, I don't know anything about that. You may be right that it exists already, or could be something on the forefront of behavioral economics. I think, I think that there's a simpler answer, also due to Richard Thaler. And that's just to say there's a present bias. What does Richard Thaler mean by present bias? He means whenever you're making decisions for any point in the future, you're saying what your future self should do, what your present self, there's always a little bit of bias in favor of making your present self better off. It's not extreme, right? It's not that you will borrow money now, even if there's a 1,000,000% interest rate on it, knowing that you'll be screwed later. It's not that. It's could be a relatively small bias, but there appears to be something that you could just describe as a present bias. So if you're making a decision for your future self, there's no present bias for that future self. But when the time of that future, when your timeline catches up to that point, now all of a sudden, that's your present self for that person, and it could change your decision. This is a really simple, you talk about plausible explanations for what was observed. This is really plausible, isn't it? People just seem to care more about their present self, so it's a present bias. And so I'm not saying to Peter, your theory about how people experience time in the future is bunk. Really, all I'm saying is there probably isn't a lot of drive to try to fix the system that we have, because we already have a pretty simple explanation for why this might happen. And you're talking about a more complicated explanation, which may be still true and may have some elements of truth. But for me, as an instructor of behavioral economics, I'm kind of good with the explanation we have. There's the present bias, and there's also willpower as an explanation. That's a valuable resource, actually, is to have willpower. And it's depletable. I want to give you some studies of that too. Let's see. I'm not going to do the math of this, but yeah, here's the Thaler. In 1981, Thaler did this experiment, and it was hypothetical, but he really found these people were not consistent. They would choose one apple today in choice A, but they would choose 2 apples in a year and a day, given the second choice options in choice B. And then if you look at this and you look at these other situations and you try to find a plausible explanation for that, a small but consistent present bias can help to explain that. Okay. Here's me talking more about time inconsistencies. I've already explained it to you, and this. Take a look at these slides if you want to see it specifically applied to the marshmallow test. The fact that people might choose different things for their future selves at different points during the marshmallow test. But let's skip it. Let's not spend too much time. I've already talked about all of these too. I've talked about the Odyssey, Christmas Club, watching different movies, and Dan Ariely's experiment with the 3 different types of exams when there were papers. They had to write papers, and the people who had the forced commitment did the best. People who had the optional commitment did the second best, and the people who had no commitment at all, they were free to choose what they want. This is America. We have freedom. That should be what we hope for, right? No, it makes you the worst in terms of your grades in this class. And just so you know, this was truly a random selection of the sections of his class. There was no bias where some people were sorted into certain sections and other people were sorted into other sections. It was just random. Okay. The takeaway from time preferences doesn't make sense to assume that humans behave as a single decision maker across different points in time. That's not very good. It's not very accurate when you look at what we actually do. We have emotions and desires that come and go. Oscar Wilde talked about procrastination in this quote: "Never put off until tomorrow what I can do the day after." And commitment devices tend to be very useful. Just seeing how useful commitment devices are is a really good evidence for the fact that we're not so good at planning out our lives and what we would need to do without the commitment device. The reason we need the commitment device is because we don't necessarily do a good job. by letting ourselves choose at each point in time what we want to do. Okay. Let me say kind of the last thing, and then we can have a bit of a review of this class. I think I'll show you some review stuff, and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. But willpower, Roy Baumeister is a psychologist. He's not an economist. But I do want to talk about his work here, because what he showed is that when people are forced to resist something that they're tempted by, and oftentimes he did this with fresh baked cookies. So like you walk into a laboratory and there's these fresh baked cookies just sitting there on the table, and in some of the treatments you're allowed to eat them. You're like, okay, great, you can have them, have as many as you want. And in other ones you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to eat them. You have to resist this temptation to eat the cookies. And I think maybe he did some baseline treatments where there were no cookies at all, just to see how people did. And then he would give him some task. He would say, okay, now I want you to solve some puzzle. And it could be a very difficult puzzle. And the instructions might just be, all right, work as hard as you can on this puzzle to try to solve it. If you think you just won't be able to solve it, then give up. And then the question is, how long do people work on it before they give up? And he was a little tricky about this. Some of the puzzles were impossible, I believe. I think so. If you read the psychology literature, they do a lot of stuff that's a little shady. Like, wait a second, I don't think you should be lying to subjects about this. This is not okay. And economists do not. Economists do not deceive their subjects, but psychologists do sometimes. Anyways, what they were looking at was, what was your willpower to stay and work on the puzzle, do the hard thing, and not resist the temptation just to give up? And it mattered whether you had already used your willpower to resist the temptation of the cookies. The people who had to use the willpower to resist the cookies didn't have much left and gave up sooner on the problems. Now you could argue that maybe these people were just angry that they weren't allowed to have these cookies. I don't know how you control for these other emotions that could be coming into, but he's done enough works, enough experiments that I believe him. I buy it. He has enough studies to say that willpower seems to be a limited resource that we humans have. Once you use it up, it's not so much gone. I will say he does this analogy where he talks about someone running and they get tired. It could very well be that you've been running and you are tired and you just really, really want to stop. And maybe you do stop and you think you can't go any further. However, if you take the same person who's running for their life, if they're being chased by a deadly wild animal, or maybe a bad person or something, that there's a way to like find the will to run and the strength when you didn't know you had it. And that analogy is true also for willpower. If we really need to, we can find it. It's not that we simply can't resist certain things. And nicotine and other drugs that can be very addictive. He talks about that too, how hard it is. But there's some studies that show that it's, people can surprise themselves by how able they are to resist certain temptations if they're motivated enough. Okay. Let's stop there. You guys have any questions about this sort of the last section here, time inconsistencies and commitment devices and willpower is what it would be called. Gosh, we don't have that much time left. We only have about a half hour. I'm assuming those of you who are here might be interested in hearing something about the final exam, which is scheduled to be, I think it's real late. It's one of the one of the later sections. I should tell you exactly when it's going to be.
I think it's December 4th at 12:30 to 2:30.
That sounds right. December 4th. I think that's one of the later times. But yeah, that's kind of a long time from now. So what I don't want is everyone to forget, that's what I say in the syllabus, Friday, December 4th, 12:30 to 2:30 p.m. I want to give you lots of opportunities to retain this information. Don't forget what you have learned and do well in the final when it comes. You will have a long time to work on the final. 2 hours, I think, is a long time. And it is open book, open note, open computer, open web browser. You can use the internet. You can use my videos. What you can't use is each other. I'm going to be very strict about this. You cannot share answers with other people, and there's going to be a lot of essay questions, and make sure you write your essay yourself. Don't try to get it from somebody else. And I trust you that you will do that. But what am I saying about the final? That it's 2 hours. That seems like a lot of time. But if you are spending all of the time reviewing or learning for the first time something, then your time could go quickly. And there's going to be some essay parts of it where it's good if you could spend that time writing, thinking about what you're going to say and writing it down in a clear way. Something that I'm going to read it, I should be able to tell what it is you mean by what you've written. One advice I have is think about what it would be like saying what you've written, like an inner voice inside your head that's speaking along with what you've written. And if what you've written is something you would never say out loud, then don't turn it in as your essay in a final exam in a college course. That's not necessarily going to be that helpful to everybody, but yeah, go ahead.
Just one the essays that you want us to write in the exam, they'll be the same quality essays that we've been submitting for our homeworks and for the quizzes as well, or do you want them to be?
What do you mean same quality? I want them to be great quality.
Yeah, I'm just
how long?
Lengthwise and
yeah. I would say they're mostly things you could answer in 1 or 2 paragraphs. That's it. They're not going to be a full page. So I'm going to ask you a question. And
if for the homeworks that if we've submitted, if you've graded those as 5 out of 5, could we just write same style of essay in the final?
I think so.
Trust that it'll be.
I will say this: most people do actually a pretty good job on these homework assignments, and I can tell that they're thinking about it and they're writing, and they have good writing skills. People with good writing skills, man, that helps you so many aspects of your life, and you can write something and it's like, yeah, that's definitely a 5 out of 5. But there's some people who aren't, and I'm always debating with myself how to grade somebody who just doesn't really have good writing skills, and maybe what they were trying their best to say something. And I try to be lenient in those cases because it's an economics class and not a writing class. But I do think for the final exam, I do want you to write well, because part of writing is conveying information, conveying your thoughts. You should really think about what it is I can tell about what you think based on what you've written. So I think I was pretty lenient in a lot of the homework assignments. I may have given you or anybody else 5 out of 5 on something that I think really wasn't written well, because I was also basing it on whether you actually read the thing and had some thoughts about what I was actually asking you about. If you had a thought about that and you were trying to convey it, and I thought, it's good enough, I'll give you 5 out of 5. But for the exam, I think you should worry more about whether you are conveying the information that you intend to convey. And and here's another piece of advice. If I ask you a question on the exam, and it's a behavioral economics exam, you should try to use some of the behavioral economics content to answer it. If you're answering it just like somebody who you might ask on the street, like if I ask you about, for example, if I ask you, there's this experiment Dan Ariely did about people helping you with a truck. And he says, oh, will you help me unload this truck? And he sees how many people say yes. And then in other treatments, he says, will you help me unload this truck for $1 or some small amount? And I ask you about this. I won't refer to this experiment, but I might ask you about the situation in general where you want a favor from someone. Why might use behavioral economics to explain why the person may be less likely to help you if you include a small monetary payment in this, right? If your answer is just, well, the guy probably just thought it wasn't worth the money, that may be right. Okay, you get a little bit of money and it wasn't worth it, so they said no. That's kind of what you're just asking your friend about this situation, they would say. But it's not using the concepts from behavioral economics. Like I would give you some partial credit for that. Or if you said, what else could you say? You could say, it was kind of an insult. It was an insult to be offered such little money. Like that's close. You're close to getting the right answer, the full credit for the answer. Yes, it is an insult to only be given $1 to unload someone's truck for a half hour. That sucks. Even if it's only 5 minutes of unloading a truck, it's like an insultingly small amount of money. That's true. That's what you would say if you had never taken my class. But my advice to you now is write a question to me, the person grading your exam, that shows that you have taken my class. And so what could you write about in this truck example? You could write about the difference between the world of social norms and the world of market norms. We spent some time about that in this class. And you could say, when asked for a favor, you start off in the world of social norms that make you feel good about helping people. And when somebody asks you for help, you're more likely to respond without expecting any payment at all. That's the normal world of social norms. But once the term for $1 is added to it, you leave this world of social norms. You enter the world, the way that you think about the world changes. Now you're thinking of it in terms of a market. And $1 worth of payment for even 10 minutes of hard work is just not worth it. And it makes you more likely to reject. That's the good answer. That's the A+ answer to the question. So a C answer is, it's just not enough money. A B answer is, it's so little money that it actually feels like an insult to the person, and so they're not going to do it. That's a B answer. An A answer is to say, talk about the difference between social norms and market norms, and that by saying $1, you're activating the market norms in the person. Okay? That's just one example.
Thank you so much, Professor. That was helpful.
Oh, sure, yeah. No, I wanted to give it to everybody, not just you. What else can I do to help you? Let's look at this file that I made. I posted something on Blackboard. If you go to course documents, be right at the bottom, fall 2020 final review. I wanted you to have. I debated whether or not to make this available. But I know that there are versions of this document available from previous years, and I don't want some people to have it and other people not to have it. I don't think that's fair. So I'm just making it available to everybody. It kind of goes over a lot of what we've done in this class so far. And I include some sample questions. Sample questions are like sample essay questions that are maybe a little open-ended. But what I recommend is that you take a look at these sample questions and think about, would you know how to answer them if they came up? Or you could actually answer them if you want. Give them like a try. If you have the time and you want to prepare, that's a good way to prepare. I'm not going to ask all of these. I might not ask any from it. I don't know. I probably will ask some from this. I might also ask some that are not on here. But the point is, this is a sample of the types of questions I might ask in the form of an essay. And you can see here what I do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I put 9 sample questions here that are kind of like an essay. I think I'm not going to give you 9. I will give you fewer than 9. You only have 2 hours for this exam. So I think this would take a lot of time to write this many essays. But I'm sorry I didn't give you guys more time to look at this. But if somebody wants to look at these sample questions and say, could you talk more about one of them? And I can talk more right now about one of them. Or we could go on to look at some other things. By the way, you can see this file by going to Blackboard under course documents. But let's think of right now as a review. Anything you think it would be helpful to hear more about? Like, I'm gonna ask about Fair-Schmidt and inequity aversion. There's gonna definitely be at least one question about that. So here's an example of a question that's Fair-Schmidt. You know that I'm probably gonna ask you one question about the cognitive hierarchy model. These are the 2 mathematical models I asked you to learn about. So I'm probably gonna ask you about one question from each on the final. And so I gave you 2 of those. Does anybody have a request? What would you like me to talk about? Mutually beneficial trade. Okay. You mean the sample question about mutually beneficial trade, Emily? Where are we? Sorry, which one is it? Oh, this one right here. So what's the full question? Use concepts and/or results from behavioral economics to explain why mutually beneficial trade sometimes occurs, even in cases where one party could legally exploit their position in the trade deal, making the other party worse off. What are some concepts from behavioral economics that would explain why this happens? That's what I'm asking you. Do you want to try it, or do you just want me to say? Does anybody want to try to answer this?
Sure.
Good.
Couldn't we could use a bunch of stuff like altruism, but couldn't we also just use Fair-Schmidt to show that people care about fairness or guilt, and so they would choose more socially preferable outcomes than individually?
So because people care about fairness, that means that the trade can occur even though somebody could legally exploit their position. We know they won't, or we can expect they won't because of inequity aversion. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's like a B, maybe B plus answer.
There's a better concept to apply?
There's a better answer. Think about it.
I have something I could throw out there.
Yeah.
Couldn't this be one of those cases where if we know that they're going to be making more trades in their market, doesn't that when they start doing these trades in bad faith, that it gives them basically a reputation and would probably hurt their chances of doing more business later?
That's a good way to use standard economics to explain it, which you're basically saying, if I exploit you now, I'm going to have a bad reputation and that'll hurt me later. Is that what you're thinking?
As part of it.
Yeah, I would definitely give you a lot of credit for that. I don't think it's the best of all the concepts from this class to attack this situation. I don't think that's the best. I don't think either inequity aversion or thinking about what sort of reputation effects there are explain this as well as, I'll just say, how about the trust game? What happens in the trust game? The first person makes this investment into the trust game to the other person, knowing full well that that second person could exploit their position and keep all of the money. In fact, it seems like in the trust game, nobody should ever give anything. That's the standard game theory prediction is zero investment happening during the trust game. But actually, the results, use concepts and or results. That's a key here. It's great if you could bring in some results. We know from the trust game that people, they give it a shot. They know they might be exploited, but they say, I feel like trusting you with this money. And the second players, yes, some of them exploit, but enough of them decide, I want to reward you, and let's create a situation where we're both made better off. That's kind of like mutually beneficial trade occurring, because it's not exactly the same as trade where, I sell you a watch and you give me money for it. It's not like that. It's more like we've both been made better off. And this happened despite the economic incentive to exploit the situation. We trusted that it wouldn't happen, and we got through it. And so I think if you write an essay that brings in the trust game and the results of the trust game, that would be the best answer. I'm always happy when people think about the question that I ask in the same way that I'm thinking about it. And your other answers aren't wrong. I would definitely give you a lot of points for writing an essay, a good strong essay centered around those two concepts that you guys said. But I think the best one, of all the concepts from behavioral economics, I think the trust game and the fact that people are willing to trust others, even though they know they might be the victim of some sort of exploitation, they're still willing to try it, is the best example of explanation for why this happens. Do you agree? Did I convince you?
I can't actually remember the causal factor for why people do trust.
The causal factor. You know what? I'll give you my honest answer. I don't think people think about it that much. I think people see the situation and the trust game, and they think about, well, if I give this guy some money, is he going to return some of it back? Yeah, probably. So they'll do it. So actually the most causal thing is to think about what you would do. You basically project your own behavior onto others. You think, well, I would probably share this money if it came to me. So that means this other guy's probably going to share this money. So that's what I'll do. Is that causal? What causes me to trust you? I don't know, other than, how you were raised. If you were raised as the type of person who tries to share things fairly, and that's why your answer, Peter, your answer about inequity aversion, that's actually a very good answer too, because it's because I prefer to share is partially why this trade can occur. So, your answer actually was good.
Could we also,
go ahead.
Sorry, could we also analyze this in terms of the ultimatum game? Because that seems pretty related to this.
Yeah, let's see. So you have the ultimatum game. How can we think of this as mutually beneficial trade? Well, certainly if we agree on a proposal that's beneficial to us both.
Right.
Here's what I don't agree with though, exploitation.
Well, sorry,
go ahead.
Sorry, I'm writing a paper about this in another class, so this is going to be helpful for me, I think. But so the way that I was looking at it as far as like a trade goes, if we look at the ultimatum game, like a business that's trying to hire workers, well, they know that they have a certain amount of money that they can use to hire workers. The workers know that they want to work for a certain amount, but the company still wants to hire them for as little as possible. So they say, hey, we want to pay you this much. The workers want the work, they want their labor done. But if the laborers, don't accept it, then neither of them get what they want. So I was kind of thinking about in that context, and I think still in that context, the firm or the first actor in that situation still gets like the advantage.
Yeah, you know what? I think that's a decent answer too. It's not quite as good as using the trust game, but it is because, in labor deals where, let's say, the owner is keeping all the money and the workers get paid very little, you could see that as exploitation. And what the problem says is trade occurs even when one party could legally exploit their position. So I'm not sure it's making the other person worse off.
I didn't necessarily mean it to be somebody who's actively worse off, but that rather the one actor in the game got a
yes,
comparable increase in.
It's all about how you interpret this worse off than you could have been if the deal was more fair, or worse off if there was no deal at all. You see the difference?
Right. Yeah. So I think like putting it back at like the simple terms of the game, like if somebody with the $10 allotment and they're trying to offer it to the other person, still think it comes down to where the first actor has that advantage that they can exploit, saying like, well, I can give you this like really bad deal where I get most of the excess, but even when this is run, what we show that it's not true, that they do actually tend to split fairly evenly.
Right. And that's a good answer. You know what? If you wrote about that, well, I believe I would give you full credit because that's a good explanation. That keeping $9 out of 10 in the ultimatum game could be seen as exploitation, and people don't do it because they know they'll be rejected. So they actually tend to give. I think the modal, MODAL modal offer is half.
Yeah, it's like 40 to 50%.
Well, I think it's exactly 50%. I'm not saying the median. I'm not saying I'm not saying the mean. I'm saying the modal, the most common offer, I believe, is 50%. And so that's a good way to answer it. And I'm going to grade what you write based on how well I think it answers the question. And I think you could write an answer about the ultimatum game well enough that I would give you full credit.
Great,
and perhaps even about an equity version, like Peter said. Yeah. So yeah, pretty good job, guys. Thinking about these answers. Do you want to spend? We have some more time. We could talk about another one. These are meant to be available for you to review. Go back and look at these, and I'll be home over Thanksgiving. If you have a question, we don't have any more classes together, but you can email me, and I'll try to think about, like, let's say you're talking about this one here. Someone is less likely to help you fix a flat tire if you offer them money. We've already talked about that one, so I shouldn't talk about that one. You know the answer to that one. Talk about norms. Talk about social norms and market norms. Someone might choose a different movie to watch for themselves now than they would choose to watch later. Well, we just talked about this today. What concept from behavioral economics did you bring in to your answer? Time inconsistencies, self-control, and what else? It's not really a commitment device, but it's kind of a commitment device, isn't it? In other words, I'm going to choose the more serious movie for myself later because I know that if I had to pick, my future self is going to pick the silly movie, the fun movie, and I want my future self to have to suffer through a better movie. So that would be for that one. Anyways, hopefully I can respond to your emails in a reasonable amount of time if you have questions like that. What do you guys want to do? Anybody else have any requests? By the way, these first ones are like sample questions. And then after that, I just start listing the topics and like the main points from each topic. That's all I do. They're not in the form of a question. So I don't know how helpful they'll be. They might be helpful. You can still go back and say, oh wait, what's this? I don't remember talking about that. And then that'll be a signal to you to plug in that missing knowledge that you have from this course.
So how much of the exam will be essays versus other multiple choice?
Probably going to be a lot of essay. I know you hate that, but here's the thing. It's an open book, open note, open internet exam. If I make it sort of this sort of factual stuff that you can just look up, I don't think that's really doing you justice as your instructor for this class. I want you to be able to demonstrate the knowledge that you've acquired in this class. And I don't want you, let's say you're somebody who has participated and been paying attention and you've learned a lot in this class, and you take this exam and then somebody else who hasn't done anything is able to just look up all this stuff on their own and get a higher grade than you. I would think that's unfair. I want to write an exam that asks you how to apply what you've learned also, because if it's just too factual, it's not going to measure that. And so I think of these sample questions. I remember trying to think of things that it's not good enough just to have the information, but you have to apply what you've learned. And that's what I tried to think of in these cases.
So exam is mostly essays, basically.
Yes, but not all essay. I'll probably add some multiple choice in there. Yeah, it's multiple choice. I don't think I'll do matching. I did the matching for the midterm, but I guess because there's not quite as many definitions like there was for the midterm. I'm not gonna, most of the final will be stuff that we did after the midterm. If I say anything from before the midterm, it'll only be on the topics that I have written here. Can I close this? No. I'll limit it to the prospect theory value function, preference reversals, the decoy effect, and anchoring. And then these other topics, which are kind of from before and after the midterm.
Thank you.
I think 2 hours should be more than enough. If you're the type of person who like takes a really long time to write, then I think you particularly need to be paying attention to the time that it takes. Like you may accidentally kind of spend a half hour on one essay and you just, you lost track of time. And I really don't want you to do that. Try not to spend more than, I don't want to say 10 minutes, 15 minutes per essay, because you want to make sure you leave yourself enough time for all of them. I'll think about this. If I write an exam and I think, oh gosh, I think you need more than 2 hours, even though I put 2 hours on the syllabus, I think it's okay if I give you more time, right? I might do that if I think it'll be cutting it close for some people. I'll just give you more time. And I haven't written the exam really, so I can't tell you exactly what's going to be on it. What do you guys think? You feel like you'll be ready in a week and 2 weeks? No, it's not this Friday, it's next Friday. A week and 4 days. What do you guys think? Would you have any other questions before we go? Our final class. I think during the exam, I I will start a Zoom meeting using the same link that we've used all year. So if you would like a faster line of communication with me, you should be able to chat in your Zoom chat, and I'll see it.
One last quick question.
Yeah.
You said you're available for emails. Will you also be available for any kind of Zoom office hours between now and the exam?
So I wasn't planning on it, but what do you think? Is it that's
I don't have an issue. I was just asking just to know.
you were asking if I had something planned already? Like we'll have an office hour next Friday at during class time or something like that. Oh wait, this is a Monday, Wednesday class,
Maybe if something came up and it's too much to be written in email form, maybe like a quick Zoom session, maybe.
Yeah.
Would be the best way to do it.
Yeah, you should email me and say, can we set up a time for a Zoom session, and then we can set it up.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's fine.